From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It's going to take time to recover from a storm of this magnitude. The effects are still being felt across much of the country, including in New England and states like Vermont, where there's been an enormous amount of flooding. So our response continues.
Vermont is reeling from the worst natural disaster since the epic flood of 1927. We'll go to Waterbury to speak with Ken Squire, owner of the radio station WDEV, a major source of news during the storm and for many the only source. Then former Vice President Dick Cheney begins a TV blitz to promote his new book.
In your view, we should still be using enhanced interrogation?
Yes.
Should we still be waterboarding terror suspects?
I would strongly support using it again if we had a high-value detainee, and that was the only way we could get him to talk.
We'll talk about Cheney's version of history with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, and with Glenn Greenwald. Then, soldier suicides.
All I'm asking is that as a community, that everybody gets together and stands up for these men, because the military is not going to do it.
We'll speak with Ashley Joppa Hageman. She made headlines when she confronted former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, also on a book tour, about the suicide of her husband, who inspired him to join the military. Staff Sergeant Jared Hageman killed himself ahead of what she says was his 9th deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The death toll from Hurricane Irene has jumped to at least 40 as towns in Vermont, New York, New Jersey continue to battle epic floods. Millions remain without power. Irene dumped up to 11 inches of rain on Vermont and more than 13 in parts of New York. We'll have more after headlines. On the campaign trail, Republican presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann's coming under criticism for saying Hurricane Irene should be viewed as a message from God. She made the comment Sunday at a campaign event in Florida.
And I don't know how much God has to do to get the attention of the politicians. We've had an earthquake. We've had a hurricane. He said, are you going to start listening to me here? Listen to the American people, because the American people are roaring right now because they know what needs to be done. They know the government is on a morbid obesity diet. It's got to rein in the spending. This is not a difficult problem to solve.
On Monday, Michelle Bachmann attempted to back away from her comment. A campaign spokesperson said Bachmann made the comment in jest. The Christian televangelist Pat Robertson made a similar remark last week on his TV program.
It seems to me the Washington Monument is a symbol of America's power. It has been the symbol of our great nation. We look at that monument and we say, this is one nation under God. Now there's a crack in it. There's a crack in it and it's closed up. Is that a sign from the Lord? Is that something that has significance, or is it just a result of an earthquake? You judge, but I just want to bring that to your attention, that it seems to me symbolic.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has sent a special inspection team to the North Anna nuclear plant in Virginia after last week's earthquake. The 5.8 magnitude quake is now believed to have shaken the nuclear plant more than it was designed to withstand. No significant damage has been identified so far, but the plant's 2 reactors remain shut down. Meanwhile, in Maryland, the Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant was shut down over the weekend after Hurricane Irene ripped a piece of aluminum siding from the plant and slammed the metal piece into an electrical transformer. The rebels in Libya have accused neighboring Algeria of an act of aggression for admitting the fleeing wife of Muammar Gaddafi and 3 of his children, but the whereabouts of Colonel Gaddafi himself remain a mystery. Algeria's foreign ministry said Gaddafi's wife Safia, his daughter Aisha, and his sons Hannibal and Mohammed entered Algeria Monday morning. Meanwhile, for the 3rd time this month, rebels are claiming they've killed Gaddafi's son Khamis, but once again, no proof of his death has been made public. In other news from Libya, Physicians for Human Rights has issued a new report accusing Gaddafi forces of targeting civilians with rape, torture, and summary executions. Meanwhile, African Union chief Jean Ping has accused Libya's rebels of treating black Africans as mercenaries from Muammar Gaddafi. Ping spoke to journalists in Ethiopia.
ANC seems to confuse black people with mercenaries. All blacks are mercenaries. If you do that, which means 1/3 of the population of Libya, which is bad, which is black, is also mercenaries. They are killing people, normal workers, mistreating them, invading some embassies like the embassy of Kenya, some embassies in Tripoli.
In other Libya news, the Wall Street Journal's reporting the Libyan convicted of bombing Pan Am Flight 103 over Scotland in 1988 has maintained his innocence even in private correspondence with Libya officials. The newspaper has obtained a letter written by Abdelbaset El-Megrahi to Libya's intelligence chief. In the letter, Megrahi wrote, "I am an innocent man." The Journal obtained the letter after gaining access to the former intelligence chief's office. Megrahi served 8.5 years in prison in Britain, but was released in August 2009 because of his failing health. He's now in a coma in Libya. The letter's likely to spark new questions about Megrahi's involvement in the bombing that killed 243 passengers and 16 crew members. On Monday, Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond says Scotland does not plan to seek his extradition.
Under Scottish jurisdiction, I've never had any intention of calling for his extradition, and it's been made clear by the Libyan Transitional Council, who are the new duly constituted legal authority in Libya, that even if there had been, they would have no intention of agreeing to it.
August has become the deadliest month for U.S. troops in the nearly 10-year-old war in Afghanistan. 66 U.S. troops have died so far this month, eclipsing the 65 killed in July 2010. In addition, the NATO coalition suffered the loss of 2 British, 4 French, 1 New Zealander, 1 Australian, 1 Polish, and 4 other troops whose nationalities have not yet been disclosed. Meanwhile, an expose by the Associated Press has revealed the Afghan government intentionally helped scuttle preliminary peace talks between the U.S. and the Taliban. According to the AP, the Afghan government leaked details of clandestine meetings between Washington and a personal emissary of Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar. Once details of the talks emerged, the talks imploded and the Taliban intermediary went into hiding. The AP reports the talks were deliberately revealed by someone within Hamid Karzai's presidential palace out of fear that any agreement Washington brokered would undermine Karzai's authority. The Pentagon's use of no-bid contracts has tripled since the U.S. was attacked on September 11th, in spite of promises to reform the controversial practice. According to a new investigative report from the Center for Public Integrity, no-bid spending has ballooned from $50 billion in 2003 to $140 billion in 2011. One instance cited in the report details how the Department of Defense awarded $50 million in sole source contracts to an Arizona company in order to develop a lightning shooting device that could detonate improvised explosives from the front of a vehicle. The Marines eventually canceled the contract. It was later revealed a separate company has developed the same technology for $1.5 million. So far this year, the Pentagon's allowed competition on just 55% of its war contracts, the lowest rate since 9/11. In addition to the Center for Public Integrity's findings, the Independent Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan is preparing to release a report showing that 1 in every 6 contracting and grant dollars spent in Iraq and Afghanistan has been wasted, totaling some $30 billion lost. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports the Israeli military is planning to give tear gas and stun grenades to Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank ahead of the expected United Nations vote on Palestinian statehood this fall. The move comes as parts of Israel's preparations to deal with possible confrontations with Palestinians after the vote. The Israeli army is also drafting guidelines on when it would be appropriate to shoot live ammunition at the feet of Palestinian protesters. Under pressure to spur job growth, President Obama announced Monday he has chosen Princeton labor economist Alan Krueger to become the top White House economist and that he will offer a jobs plan next week. Krueger is an expert on unemployment. He'll succeed Austin Goolsbee as chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors.
Experience to the job. He's one of the nation's leading economists. For more than 2 decades, he studied and developed economic policy both inside and outside of government. In the first 2 years of this administration, as we were dealing with the effects of a complex and fast-moving financial crisis, a crisis that threatened a second Great Depression, Allen's counsel as chief economist at the Treasury Department proved invaluable.
A new report finds more than half of Muslim Americans feel U.S. anti-terror policies have placed them under intensified surveillance or monitoring, while many have experienced increased name-calling, threats and harassment by airport security, police officers and others. Despite the complaints, most Muslims report being satisfied with the way things are going in the U.S. and rate their communities highly as places to live, according to data gathered by the Pew Research Center. A federal judge in Alabama has temporarily blocked Alabama's controversial immigration law after the measure was challenged by the Obama administration. Under the new law, contracts held by undocumented immigrants would become null. Police would be required to arrest anyone they suspect of being in the country without legal status, and public schools would be required to determine the immigration status of enrolled students. The law would also make it a crime to knowingly harbor or transport an undocumented immigrant. In an editorial published Monday, the New York Times described Alabama's measure as, quote, the country's cruelest, most unforgiving immigration law. A commission has found U.S. medical experimentation conducted in Guatemala during the 1940s resulted in the deaths of 83 people. The testing focused on sexually transmitted diseases and involved U.S. medical officials intentionally infecting Guatemalan sex workers, prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients without their permission in order to study the effects of penicillin. President Obama put together the commission to investigate the program when it was unearthed late last year. On Tuesday, the commission concluded nearly 5,500 people were subjected to diagnostic testing in Guatemala and more than 1,300 exposed to venereal diseases by contact or inoculation. Guatemalan President Alvaro Colom has described the experiments as a crime against humanity and ordered his own investigation. The Guatemala program was discovered by Wellesley College professor Susan Reverby while she was researching the infamous Tuskegee Airmen experiments. Professor Reverby spoke to Democracy Now! Last year and discussed how much U.S. officials knew about the practices the program's architect, John Cutler, was engaged in.
It's too easy to say, okay, this was a period when there wasn't research norms or any of the kind of regulations we've had in place since the mid-'70s. But Cutler's bosses at the Public Health Service knew this was sort of really on the edge. And the quote that I found that just really knocked me off the chair was one from the Surgeon General himself, who said, and this is secondhand, but it was in a letter to Cutler, where one of his colleagues said, the Surgeon General says, well, we couldn't do this in the United States. And that's just
leading
stunning.
Climate scientist James Hansen was arrested Monday, along with 60 others, at a protest outside the White House against the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. Hansen's the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. Hansen called on President Obama to reject the pipeline, which would stretch from Canada to Texas. Since last week, 522 people have been arrested in Washington protesting the pipeline. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.